My father was born in Japan, and he came here and married my mother, who was born here. And my grandfather was a minister here at St. Peter's in 1938, 39. And so I was brought here to be baptized, and then we went back to, I guess we eventually moved here, but then my father had asthma, so he was told to move to a drier climate, so we moved to Los Angeles. And from Los Angeles, we were relocated to Manzanar, California, in Owens Valley, and that was a relocation center. And one of the first was to be opened. And a memory I have about that is the windows were not in the barrack shed. And I got up in the morning and there was this white spot where my head was. And that's because the first night there was nothing in the windows, and so that was my mark there.
I was born in Bellevue, and my folks were truck farmers. My dad had a job at Seattle Parlor, which was a furniture manufacturing company. And then they started Bellevue Vegetable Growers Association, which would now be called a co-op, for the farmers to market their produce. So they got this packing business started. My dad was the secretary manager. So it got to be a pretty good business. They ice packed produce and shipped it to Chicago and New York, etc. When Pearl Harbor came on December 7th, on the morning of December 8th, around 4 or 5 o'clock, the FBI was banging on our door. They took him into the immigration office here and put him behind bars. My mom was very upset. She graduated from high school in Bellevue, and she knew that there are certain rights given to American citizens. The worst part of the story is my dad was born in Hawaii, but his mother got pleurisy, so when his father decided they needed to move back to Japan so she can get well. And he neglected to pick up the birth certificate. So when the war broke out, he didn't have a birth certificate, so he was classed as an enemy alien and shipped off to Missoula, Montana. So we continued to farm without him, and the War Production Board required all farmers to continue growing their produce even though evacuation was imminent. Well, it was May 22nd is when they moved the folks from Bellevue off, and crops were ready for harvest. Lettuce and strawberries were just about ready. The Bellevue Chamber of Commerce, or whoever sponsored it, had a strawberry festival each year, and the Japanese strawberry producers, they donated all the strawberries. Well, lo and behold, they had the festival, but no strawberries, so they had to cancel it because nobody was there to pick it. My uncle had a lettuce crop ready for harvest. Some huckster came around and bought it for pennies on a dollar and thought he'd make $1 million, but he couldn't get anybody to harvest the lettuce, and next thing you know, it all bolted, so I guess he got his comeuppance. They came in army trucks, picked us up. All we can take was one suitcase. So I had 2 sisters and 1 brother and my mom, and one of my mom's sisters helped us, and we each lugged our suitcase and went. They hauled us down to Kirkland, Washington for getting on the train, and we had our first train ride. went from Kirkland to Fresno, and they had camp in what they call Pinedale. And this was in May, and it was already hot. The barracks it was just blacktop base, and the building was on top of it. The beds were on this blacktop, and it got so hot the legs of the bed would sink into the blacktop. The good thing about Pinedale, I remember, is they had organized baseball for us kids. They didn't have Little League in those days, so it was great to have a team to play with, and so each of the communities that were in that camp had a team and age group, and it was just like Little League. I was almost 12. I was 11 when we went to Pinedale, and then when we went to Tule Lake, I turned 12. Went to Tule Lake, which is where we were, was built on a ancient lake bed. So the terrain was really flat and sandy. It's beach sand, and then the only growth around there was sagebrush. When the wind blew, all that dust came in. I don't know how my mom was able to withstand all the changes, because quite a drastic change for the older folks. The bathrooms were no stalls. Shower room was like the old army showers that you see in the movies, where it's mass people, no stalls for showers or anything. So Tule Lake, for me, being turned 12 years old, it was sort of an adventure. We were at the edge of the camp, and there was still room for expansion, so we had room to roam around inside the fence. So a friend of mine and I, we used to turn over this and that and try to look for scorpions and arrowheads and that kind of thing. Getting back to my dad, he got released from Missoula, where they detained all of the leaders of the community, and they had a hearing for each one. They released him in June, and then he joined us in Pinedale and came to Tule Lake. He worked on the farm, and I don't know where Mom got this hot plate in this pan, but he would bring home potatoes every once in a while, so he'd have boiled potatoes. And the furniture in the barracks was nothing except cots. So the mess hall would receive their produce in wooden boxes. They had a partition in the middle, and that was a prized piece of furniture for everybody, was to get a wooden box, because it had an orange box, because it had a shelf in it. So we used to scrounge that. And then the other thing that I remember is the smell, the odor, when they called it lamb stew, but it was mutton stew, and it just permeated the whole camp. So you knew what was coming up for dinner. The cooks used, what I found out later, was the basic Army cookbook, and the rice when we first got there was paste. Likewise, the macaroni and cheese was cut in pieces, and it came out, just one glob. I got drafted in 1953, and lo and behold, the Army was still serving the same stuff. You can still smell the mutton stew, you can still see the macaroni and cheese, and the rice was terrible. So they hadn't changed at all. We left camp Tule Lake in September, so I was only in camp for a few months. And we relocated into Montana to help harvest sugar beets as a family group, and then we stayed in Montana. The reason we stayed in Montana is our farmstead burned down the house and barns and garage and everything, so Dad knew that he would not be able to come back and build right away, and he had an opportunity to purchase the farm we were working on, and so he decided we would stay in Montana, which was fine with us kids. So that's where I grew up, was in Montana. I went to school in Montana, and then I went to work from Montana to U.S. Department of Agriculture. We came back in Seattle. Janice and I got married in 1969, and we came back to Bellevue in 1985. Then we're here.
Well, I was really quite young, we went, because I told you that my father had asthma, so we moved to California and we managed a hotel. My mother sent us to Maryknoll because my father had to take care of the hotel. And so my sister and I were there while my mother was sick, and after she became better, we went back to the hotel, and then we relocated to Manzanar, and I told you only the first night I spent there. But you know, they developed a lot of things for kids to do. They're all away from their homes, and so they're kind of lost, and so they built a lot of things for us. And so I felt that it was, I was very lucky. They built these gardens, and for a day out, it was really supposed to be a big thing for us, but you know, they had to empty the garbage from the mess hall, so we went to the pig farm in a truck with a lunch, and that was our outing. So you know, I wasn't really involved so much as, I mean, like my folks having to uproot and move. We're the children, so we just went along. I spent kindergarten, first grade, I think, and then preschool there. And we had teachers that were retired teachers from in the area, and they're the ones that taught us. We met new friends. There was an orphanage at Manzanar, and they were next to the barrack where I lived, and so they let us go play at the orphanage with the other kids. And I later heard about one of the people from camp. She talked about her life there at Manzanar and the orphanage, and I used to play with those kids, and she came to my high school. And I often wondered, you know, I might have been playing with her, and I met her in high school. I didn't know who she was, but their names were changed. They dropped their Japanese names and they picked up American names. One of the big experiences was we all ate in a mess hall, and a lot of the families were separated because, you know, at home you ate with your family. Over there at the mess hall, you went to eat with your friends, and so I think the parents lost a little bit of control over their children, and that was kind of difficult, I think, for them. You know, they had hospital facilities and everything for us, and if they could find work on the camps, they could do that. And they had movies and things like that for us. So I realized how difficult that time was for my parents. As I got older, I realized what they went through, and I was there having fun. After we were there a couple years, you could get a pass to get out of the relocation camp if you had a place to go. And they knew a family that had a farm in Spokane, and they had a place for us to live, so we were able to transfer out of Manzanar, and we went there, and they farmed for several years. Well, my brother, I had a younger brother born in camp, and so there were three of us, an older sister who's passed on, and me, and then my younger brother. We lived like a farming family until we moved to Seattle to be with our relatives that were in Tule Lake. And that's when I started really becoming a full member of St. Peter's. A lot of the Japanese people, they managed hotels and things like that. So, but they all went to Minidoka here, and I was from Manzanar, so I didn't know anybody. But you know, you get to know kids. I went through high school here, so yeah, I grew up here really. Well, we actually, my mother brought my sister and I to Seattle because her parents lived here, and we lived with them and went to Bailey Gatzer. But on Friday nights, my father's side of the Shojis, he's a minister, they would come and pick us up. So we would spend the weekend and go to church with them on Sunday. And then we returned to my other grandparents' place on Monday. So we had a church, training that way. And until my parents were able to come back to Seattle with us. And then we opened a grocery store. And my father worked for the railroad, and we lived behind the grocery store. There was a Jewish synagogue next door to us. And the person that was, that cleans the synagogue, came and asked my mother if they could pay us to turn the lights on and off, because Jewish people, they can't cook and they can't use electricity. So we would just get a quarter and go in there and turn the light off or turn it on. And so, for them. And it was a normal childhood after that. Oh, while we were in camp, my father there's a group, they said that if you want to go back to Japan, you can. My father wanted to go back to Japan because that's where he's from. My mother talked him out of it, which I'm really happy about, because, we're American citizens at this point. My father didn't get a citizenship by that time. And so, that's why we remained here, and I'm forever thankful to my mother because it would have been a rough life there.
When World War II started, people always looked a little suspiciously at Japanese people, thinking they were spies, etc. As an example, we lived on top of a hill, and we had the yard light right at the peak of our house. And in those days, nobody had indoor plumbing. So to go do your business at night, we had kids, how they are, they just flip on the old yard light and go, and next thing you know, the sheriff would come up and he'd say, "You gotta shut that light off. You're no lights from dusk to dawn. So-and-so from across the lake there, Mid-Lakes, turned you in." So I think nowadays you read about the Muslim people having to put up with vandalism at their religious places, and people looking suspiciously at the way they dress, for example. So it's quite, it does bring back those things, and I really don't know when people will let people be themselves without butting in and trying to say you don't belong here. It's ridiculous. The other side of it, when I think about it, is there were only 120,000 of us when the war broke out. So registration was not that big a problem. But if they tried to register everybody, man, you'd have to have a whole new department to do that. They talk is cheap, but they can't do it.
I'm proud of the fact that when they're helping the Muslims, the younger people now, they're getting involved in helping them, because they understand that their parents went through the same thing, and I'm proud that they're doing that.